Hello everyone and welcome to BriscoeGames. As you saw in the title today, we're going to be reviewing the Xbox Series X and S, or as I like to call them, the XBros, because they're part of a pair of consoles like brothers, and because the Xbox is like that familiar buddy that you can always come to for some comfort gaming. Microsoft has firmly established itself as one of the big three when it comes to console gaming. The Xbox brand has helped shape the state of gaming as we know it today. Launching with the original Xbox and introducing Xbox Live, it helped popularize online gaming to the phenomenon that it is now. Microsoft would go on to release the Xbox 360 afterwards, which would be its best-selling console of all time to this day currently. And after that would go on to release the Xbox One, which was a huge disastrous launch that ended up still being a successful platform for them, introducing key concepts such as Game Pass and helping them build a foundation for what would become the Xbox Series X and S. And that's what we're here to talk about today. So the Xbox Series X and the Xbox Series S. Both of these consoles are pretty great in their own regards, one more so than the other in my opinion, but regardless of which one you get, you'll be able to take the current Xbox experience you have and just have a drastically better one as far as enjoying games and just getting in and out of content, as these systems are significantly faster than their last gen predecessors, and they're actually great consoles overall by offering different things and benefits such as the developer mode, which will allow you to even install emulators on there and basically turn your Xbox into a multi-generational console that you can hook up right to your TV and enjoy things all the way back to the NES and older, up until the PlayStation 2, GameCube, Wii, and possibly even 3DS era. So first off, the look and design of the consoles. If I had to describe the look and design of the Xbox Series X and S in one word, I would say safe is the best example for that. There's nothing radical or eye-catching about the consoles. Their looks are very boxy and designed in a way to hide in your entertainment setup, which is absolutely fine and there's nothing wrong with that, and generally people prefer that. Just something that you can put there, put your disc in if you have the Series X. We'll get to the Series S later on that, and just go ahead and game. So there's nothing really wrong with the designs or the looks of them. It's just that they're kind of safe. The Series S, I would say, is definitely the more traditional console looking of the two. It's super small compared to the Xbox Series S and looks very Nintendo-like to an extent with the whole white scheme of it, and it definitely looks like a speaker when you stand it up because of the big fan on the top of it. But overall, it's definitely the sleeker looking of the two in my opinion, just because it's a smaller little box and they were able to squeeze a lot into that little box. Now the Xbox Series X, is definitely a bit more intimidating, and this thing is thick. I'm talking thick, like thicker than a Snicker thick, like cold grits and oatmeal thick. It's like a log almost. It still looks great as a black obelisk, so anyone who knows about little micro PCs or little towers like that, it's very similar to that, as well as the trash can MacBook Pro, or not MacBook Pro, the Mac Tower. So it has that same kind of look to it and aesthetic to it. It also has a green little tint to the top of it, so even when it's turned off, it looks like it has RGB running, except minus the R and the B, so you're just getting the green. But it definitely looks good as well too. It's just kind of a thick, blocky console. But on to the controller. So the controller is pretty much identical to the original Xbox One controller. I was about to say One X controller, but the Xbox One controller, which in itself was a great controller as well too, so there really wasn't a need to change it. There's definitely a few differences though, a few key differences. One, there's a textured grip to the controller on the back where your hands go and on the triggers as well too, to kind of help your hand just get a better tactile grip of what's on there and just a better feeling in your hand. It feels kind of weird at first because it's not smooth and you feel a little bumpiness and you're like, ooh, what's that? I don't like that on my hand. But it's definitely feels natural over time once you get to use it, because it just helps your hands just rest better and you don't have to worry about your hands slipping off. There's also a share button on the controller now, so just like with other platforms that had a share button, you can click on that to help upload and create your content and get that done quicker, so you don't have to go through menus or things like that, or hold the X button and try to figure out the Xbox button, try to figure out how you're gonna get there and save things if you're in the middle of a game or not. So that's definitely more convenient. And they also changed the D-pad, which is a lot more clicky. So I'm gonna put it up to the mic so you can kind of hear that. So yeah, you hear that quite often if you use that in certain games. So if you're playing things like fighting games or things like that, you're gonna hear that little clack, 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 click, clickety, clack. Oh, yes, I said clack, 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 clickety, clack. But the controller is definitely a slight improvement. It's along the lines of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And it wasn't broke, so Microsoft definitely didn't try to do anything too radical with that. Now, as far as the hardware goes, this can venture off into getting way too technical for something that people might be watching just casually. So I'll try to save a deep dive where we go further into the hardware, explaining the different components, for another video. But jumping into the hardware, overall, the Xbox Series X is a pretty big jump compared to where they came from previously with the Xbox One and even the Xbox One X. The Xbox Series S, however, while it's technically better in several regards, it's not the biggest jump in comparison to the Series X, especially if you're comparing the Xbox One X to the Xbox Series S. So both consoles use the exact same CPU from AMD, which is their Zen 2 CPU. With that, it basically gives both consoles 8 cores and 16 threads to work with, which is a huge upgrade from what they came from previously with the 8-core Jaguar CPUs. So basically, long story short, this gives the consoles about 4 to 5 times more processing power in the CPU alone. And with that, this is one of the largest upgrades gen over gen for the new consoles outside of the SSD. And speaking of the SSD, both consoles use the same SSD as well, with the Xbox Series S using a 512 gigabyte version, while the Xbox Series X uses a 1 terabyte version. Now for the main differences. As I said previously, the SSD sizes are different, but so is the CPU in one regard, where the Xbox Series X has a 3.6 gigahertz GPU clock across all 16 threads and 3.8 against the 8 cores. The Series S, however, is 0.2 gigahertz lower in clocks in both of those categories, so it's at 3.4 gigahertz across all 16 threads and 3.6 gigahertz across the 8 cores. Also, the VRAM for the consoles, the Xbox Series X has 16 gigs of GDDR6 split into 2 pools, a 10 gig pool at 560 gigabits per second and a 6 gig pool split at 336 gigabits per second. Now, usually splitting VRAM is a problem and it can be problematic for performance and have slight performance issues, but considering the amount that these consoles have, I don't see that being an issue, at least not early on. And if there is one later on, it will be minor dips in performance, which we probably wouldn't even know about because the consoles will be aiming for a targeted frame rate anyway. So it shouldn't be a huge problem with the Series X, but it can potentially be a problem in the future. However, for the Series S, it only has 10 gigs of RAM, so it has 6 gigs less than the X, and it has an 8 gig pool and a 2 gig pool, with the 8 gig pool being at 224 gigabits per second and the 2 gig being at 56 gigabits per second, which isn't the greatest at all, and that is definitely leaning towards being problematic in a not too distant future. The Series S actually has even less RAM than the Xbox One X, which came out in 2017. And even though it's GDDR6 versus 5, still having that extra RAM that the Xbox One X had versus the S is probably one of the reasons why backwards compatibility on the S targets the Xbox One S instead of the Xbox One X enhancements. I told you we're gonna hear a lot of X and S's and series, and I'm gonna probably get this confused as I said earlier, but yeah, overall the Xbox Series S and X are solid consoles and similar in a lot of categories except for the ones I just mentioned and the GPU. So for the Series X, the GPU has a 12 teraflop GPU from AMD's RDNA 2.0, and the Series S has a 4 teraflop GPU from AMD's RDNA 2.0. So basically the Series X is pretty equivalent to AMD's newest RX 6800 GPU, although slightly weaker and with 8 less CUs than the 6800. But the 6800 is a $579 GPU at MSRP, and the Xbox Series X is an entire console, CPU, GPU, RAM, and everything else for $500. So Microsoft was able to make a pretty powerful console that is among some of the top performing GPUs that we have out right now available, and they were able to do it and build an entire system for less than what these GPUs are costing for PC gamers. But a console isn't a PC, and it is about the value. So overall, basically what I'm trying to say on the hardware end, the Xbox Series X is definitely worth the value and the $499 price point that is being sold at, whereas the Series S, that $299 that is being sold for, is still a good value, but the longevity of the console is going to come into question in the not too distant future for the performance and hardware that it has within it. So now let's talk about the software and the services. So once again, Xbox pretty much went with the if it ain't broke, don't fix it mentality, as the user interface is pretty much identical to what you're probably already playing right now on your Xbox One. All your apps and things that you use on your current Xbox One, they're pretty much there as well too. So the main thing with the software side of the Xbox is it just works. So what you're used to doing on your current Xbox One, it'll be practically identical, although significantly faster, again due to the SSD, than what it was on your One X or Xbox One S. So with that, there are new features to be had though. So Quick Resume is one of those features where it can store a minimum of 3 save states in games on your SSD and in memory, so that you can freely go between those games almost effortlessly in less than 10 seconds. So this is a pretty big deal, because just like on your cell phone, how you can swap between apps super fast, with the Xbox Series X and S, with this faster SSD and more memory, they're basically able to pretty much do the exact same thing, but it's a bigger deal because you're running through 10 gigabyte to 100 gigabyte games this fast versus a 100 megabyte app. So it's a pretty huge thing, and it definitely helps out with loading in between things and helping when you're actually doing a review for a console. Now, as far as games go for the console, for the Xbox Series X and the Xbox Series S, it's kind of a mixed bag, and I'll explain why that is during each of these segments. But let's start off with the good. So the good for the console is backwards compatibility. Simply put, just like with the software, it just works. Everything from your Xbox One, except for maybe Kinect-based games, most of the Xbox 360 games, and a small pool of original Xbox games run natively on the Xbox Series S and X. And if you have the Xbox Series X, they run significantly better as they run in the Xbox One X boost mode. So it can run those games up to native 4K at whatever frame rate they were targeting, and usually it sticks to that target frame rate lock. There are a few occasions where it can kind of waver, but for the most part, you're getting a solid and big upgrade over what you would have been playing natively on your Xbox One, where you play these backwards compatibility game on the Xbox One X. The Xbox One S doesn't fare quite as well. It still has the same compatibility that the Xbox One X has. However, it runs those things at pretty much a lower resolution, and also it doesn't get the boosted performance of the Xbox One X mode since it's running natively as an Xbox One S. So you still get the benefit of full backwards compatibility, but just not the performance boost that the Xbox Series X gets. Now, on to the major problem that the Xbox has and have been having for several years now. Their first party has absolutely nothing worthwhile at launch, and they have not been able to get out of whatever rut they're in right now to try to get the performance where they need to be, and it doesn't look like it's gonna really kick into effect until as far as 2022. So for those of you who are fine with playing just third-party games, so playing your Call of Duties, your Assassin's Creeds, and Battlefields and things like that, the Xbox Series X will still have those games and it'll still run them great. But for those of you who are a little bit more into what Microsoft is developing exclusively for the Xbox, those games aren't really coming until 2021, with Halo Infinite expected to launch sometime that year. Maybe a few other games trickling out as well with Halo, but for the most part, those games look like they're coming out in 2022, if not later. So for a first party perspective, this is probably one of the worst launches I've ever seen for a console, because they basically have nothing here. And this brings us to the good, the bad, and the ugly. So, the good. The good for the Xbox Series consoles is, once again, I said this a few times and you're probably gonna hear it a couple more times, but the system just works. Like, everything just works. You don't have to worry about spending a significant amount of time in loading screens anymore because it's lightning fast. Everything that you want is right there. So your apps and everything, all your backwards compatible games, basically everything you love about your Xbox One is just much better on the Xbox Series X, and to an extent the Xbox Series S as well. But the bad is that Microsoft has still been stuck in this lack of exclusives and lack of games that they have not been able to compete with the, Sony and Nintendo. So this is definitely an area where many people were hoping that they would be able to grow and improve and change, and they've bought multiple studios, so eventually we will see the fruits of that labor. But for right now, in the here and now, there's just nothing there, and it definitely just isn't where Microsoft needs to be as far as launching a new console against what was one of the best-selling consoles of all time, the PlayStation 4. This isn't the kind of competition or comparisons that Microsoft need at this point. Also, speaking of comparisons, the Xbox Series X was constantly touted by Microsoft to be one of the most powerful systems, the most powerful console of all time, the beast, the monster. It eats things for breakfast, lunch, dinner, snack, brunch, and whatever other time of day. And the reality is, in the here and now, that's not happening. The PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X are performing neck and neck, with the PlayStation 5 actually having small advantages. They're not huge deals, but they are advantages that Microsoft had consistently claimed that the Xbox Series X will have, and it's not happening right now. Now, there's a lot of reasons people have been saying, like developer tools and things like that, and I'll get into that in another video as well. But in the here and now, the PlayStation 5 is actually performing a bit better in almost every game, in almost every case. Now, the ugly. So, the ugly for me is, and I hate to say this, as I said, it's the games, but it's also the Xbox Series S. Because I just don't know if it's going to really last all of these years. I just don't know. I don't know at all. But getting back to being serious, the Series S, as I said, is a great product for the price, but the longevity of being able to run these games as games become more and more demanding is going to be problematic for the console, because here we are at launch of the new console and it's already starting to struggle in certain areas and certain aspects in new games. So resolution is having to be dropped below 1080p, sometimes down to 720p, and this is a console that Microsoft is marketing as a 1440p console. So that's a huge drop off and definitely a huge lack of clarity in your image going from 1440p to 720p. So I just don't see how this console is going to continue to get more and more demanding games and be able to keep up unless some drastic thing happens with the tools, or unless AMD's AI's upscaling solution turns out to be every bit as good as NVIDIA's DLSS. So with that being said, let's go ahead and wrap this up. The Xbox Series X is a powerful console that unfortunately has no new games to push the hardware at launch, making it basically a significantly faster backwards compatible console, so a significantly faster Xbox One X, which overall isn't a bad thing at all. It's just that unfortunately Microsoft is just going to need more time to get their games out, and unfortunately for Microsoft, they've been playing the wait game for way too long now. So as far as like sales goes compared to their competition, I think this might be another catch-up generation for Microsoft, but the hardware that's there with the Xbox One X is definitely worth it and definitely worth the buy, especially if you're an Xbox fan. However, for the Xbox Series S, it seems to be an affordable entry in the current generation of consoles, but I just don't see the longevity and I don't see the potential when the system only has a 512 gig hard drive in an all-digital console, which actually you only get about 364 gigs. So downloading 5 of your favorite games, like if you play Call of Duty Warzone, basically you've used almost 1/3 of your hard drive immediately, and there's no way to get more storage, or you can't have a disc or anything like that without having to pay for more of it out of pocket. So if you get the 1 terabyte external NVMe that Microsoft is selling for $220, which is absolutely ridiculous, but if you go ahead and get that, at that point you could have just gotten an Xbox Series X to begin with. And if you get a normal external hard drive, the games that are running backwards compatibility mode will run a little bit slower. They'll still be faster than you running it natively on your previous console, but at that point you could have potentially got an all-digital PlayStation 5 as well. So the value proposition for the Xbox Series S, while looking at the price point alone, is a good value. Putting it in comparison with the competition and even the Xbox Series X and just trying to get more memory and things like that, it starts to look a bit more grim for that console. So with that being said, I'm gonna go ahead and give the Xbox Series X an 8 out of 10 for the console. It's an amazing console, wonderful console, and it's definitely something that's gonna make their Xbox fans happy. The Xbox Series S, I'm gonna give it a 7 out of 10 right now. And honestly, I feel like these scores are going to go up and down. I feel like the Xbox Series X is just going to go up as more and more games come out and as more people get more content onto the platform, whereas the Xbox Series Lord have mercy, whereas the Xbox Series S, I went the whole video without messing up, and here I'll go at the end. The Xbox Series S is probably going to go down. There's a chance it could go up as well for the same benefits as the X, but if the performance doesn't continue to stay where it is now, or if it doesn't get better, then I just see the console value just going down more and more, and I just see that score going down as well too. But for the here and now, we have an 8 out of 10 and a 7 out of 10. If you're an Xbox fan, you're gonna love this console. If you were never an Xbox fan, this is probably not going to do anything for you. And if you just want to play Xbox games, you know you can do it on the console, but now there's other ways you can do it as well too, which we'll get into in another video. But for Xbox fans, the Xbox Series X at least is a great console and a great upgrade that you'll want to try to get. So be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and click the bell notification so you can get all the up-to-date content that I'll be releasing over the next several months. Well, I say next several months, but I'm gonna stick with this for a while. So all the content I'm gonna be releasing. And while you're at it, leave a comment below just talking about your favorite Xbox experience, whether that's your favorite Xbox game, what you love to play, what you love about the Xbox, or something that you might want to know about the Xbox Series X and S that you probably didn't hear in this video, or you probably want to know a bit more on. Until then, I'll see you next time, and peace.